It's been a while since I've chaired a meeting like this. All right, well, like I said, I'm Eric Berkey. Good evening with the Planning Commission. Welcome to the March 11th, 2024 Barcroft Working Group meeting. Thanks for participating in this land analysis review of the Barcroft Apartments Master Financing and Development Plan. We look forward to working with all of you and many other stakeholders over the next few months to review Jair Lynch's vision for Barcroft in the context of existing county policies and plans. Again, you all have probably heard this, but I do need to cover some logistics in these virtual meetings. So we're holding this virtual public meeting today, and everyone joining us is joining remotely. Tonight's meeting is available to join from the Barcroft Apartments Land Analysis webpage and the county's events calendar. Additionally, there is a dial-in phone option for those who wish to use it. If anyone loses internet connectivity during tonight's meeting, please reconnect by phone. Please keep your microphone muted until you're called upon. Please turn off sound to any devices around you to minimize interference. And those tools are on the toolbar at the bottom. If you're not a member of the working group, we do ask that you remain on mute with your video off. And really, if folks want to keep their video on, that's fine. I think generally the way we've been doing it, though, is we do ask that you put your video on when you're going to speak, and if you could introduce yourself or reintroduce yourself. The meeting chat is active for technical assistance only. It shouldn't be used for discussion, public comment, questions about agenda items, or requests for more information, because all comments must be shared verbally for the record. So what we've been doing and what we plan to do tonight is I want to try to reserve about 10 minutes at the end of the meeting for public comment if we have folks who want to provide public comment. And depending on how many folks we have, I'll make a judgment call on how much time we can provide. A couple other notes. Tonight's conversation is limited to members of the Barcroft Working Group roster. Some groups have identified an alternate member, but if there's two of you on the call, we ask that only one of you serve as the spokesperson for your respective group. While everyone is invited to join and watch, please be mindful that this is a large group, and we have a lot to talk about, and we want to make sure that we use our time efficiently and capture as many perspectives as possible. If you'd like to be recognized to speak on an item, just please use that raise your hand function and make sure your video feed is on, as I said. And leave your microphone muted, and then I will basically go through kind of the list of folks who would like to speak and make sure everybody's got an opportunity to weigh in or ask a question. If there are, and I heard someone, so if you could please put yourself on mute if you're on the phone. And if you don't have video, if you're joining by phone, I will, from time to time, and if I forget, please remind me, but I'm going to verbally check just to see if there's anybody on the phone who wants to make a comment or ask a question. All of these recordings of these meetings and the information associated with it is going to be posted or is already posted on the county's website, because it is all this information, whether written or spoken, is subject to Virginia Freedom of Information Act requirements. Just a couple more things. There is an online feedback form. It's on the webpage for this project. It's open through March 24th. Please, please, please fill this out, share this widely within your networks. This is a key part of our staff's evaluation. So please share it widely. It uses plain language. It's in several different languages. And if you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to Matt or other county staff. So tonight we're going to be, this script is not correct, but it's all good. Because I'm looking at an old one. So tonight we're going to be talking about transportation. So that's the main focus tonight. So we're going to turn it to county staff, and then also folks from Walsh Colucci who are going to provide some presentations. But before we do that, in lieu of having everyone reintroduce themselves again, what I'd like to do is see if there's anybody who was not at the last meeting, or really who hasn't been at one of these meetings yet and is representing one of our stakeholder groups. If you could go ahead and raise your hand, and then I'd love for you to hop on video and introduce yourself. So I see Michelle Winters. Go ahead, Michelle.
Audio on.
Yep.
Hello.
There you go.
Hi, I'm Michelle Winters. I'm the alternate for the Arlington Community Foundation. So, and I know several of you, but not in this context. So,
Great, thanks. And we'll go to McCoy.
Hey, good evening, everyone. I am one of the representatives for Voice, and I'm here with, I think, Pat as well. And this is the first time I've made it to one of these working groups. Looking forward to learning and listening.
Wonderful. Good to see you, McCoy. Unless there's anyone else, I am going to hand it over to Matt Matusik and our county staff.
Thanks, Eric, and good evening, everybody. I'm going to cover the first portion of the presentation, and I'm joined tonight by some colleagues of mine from the Department of Environmental Services. I'll let them introduce themselves shortly. But what we wanted to do is cover a few reminders that I think are becoming regular starting points for our conversation. Make sure everybody understands as we get into each topic where we are in the overall process. It is moving fairly quickly, and we do have a lot of information to cover, but we also think there's an advantage to, I think, maintaining momentum where we don't allow too much time to go by between our meetings, so that I think a lot of these topics are fresh in everybody's minds and we can kind of have a more efficient conversation about the vision for Barcroft. So I'm going to cover the first 9 slides and remind everybody of some ongoing engagement that's happening in the community, kind of alluding to what Eric just mentioned. We do want to cover the policy context behind, again, similar to last 2 weeks, what do we have in terms of adopted policy to guide the transportation conversation, so that whether you're an expert in the topic or not, you will have most of the information available to you to make more informed decisions and provide better feedback, and really have the same starting point as everybody else when it comes to transportation. We all tend to have our own respective backgrounds and expertise. So even if this is not your particular issue, you should feel a little bit more dangerous after tonight's conversation. Once we're done, the Jai Lynch team will produce their presentation, which has been posted to the website. And then we're going to have a conversation about what we just covered and take a lot of the feedback. So with that, I'm going to just briefly touch on the graphic we continue to update, which is really emphasizing, particularly for those that haven't been participating in a meeting so far, the first half of 2024, which is really a robust engagement effort to make sure that we have ample opportunities to update the vision for Barcroft, and do so on multiple fronts. Obviously, working with all of you, a stakeholder group for a period of about 4 months, but also in between those opportunities, reaching out to other members of the community, and particularly the Barcroft residents, to make sure that they're able to follow, they're able to provide some feedback, can kind of gradually see our progress as we post all the presentations and video recordings on our project website. And again, this is going to sound repetitive, but the reason we're emphasizing the first half of the year is because to really accomplish everything we need to accomplish and realize Barcroft's vision, we first have to revisit a lot of the policies that got us here in the first place, make sure where any updates are required for those policy elements, but also identify any further evolutions in the Jai Lynch's proposal for Barcroft. And once we are able to complete that by this summer, we can then progress into the second half of the year, where some more detailed conversations can happen at the neighborhood's form-based code level, which is a much more detailed analysis and prescriptive set of exhibits that we have to address and reconcile once the vision is updated. So we're going to start at a high level of information and then zoom into the details in the second half of the year. You can see here, highlighted in yellow, we are in our second meeting. So we've covered preservation and conservation area lines. Now we're going to discuss transportation. And in 3 weeks, on April 1, we're going to regroup to discuss open space. As this is happening, you may have seen some of our staff, particularly our communication staff. Elise, I believe, is on the call, as well as Melissa and Olivia from our housing and planning divisions. We are trying our best to make regular visits to the property and the surrounding neighborhood to be available and accessible in person if people have questions or just to raise awareness about the study. So we don't want to just limit the feedback to, Monday evenings every 3 weeks. We want to make sure people have various opportunities to provide comment and raise any questions they might have as they learn more about what we're doing. So we're going to keep updating this, and you can gradually see the progress that we're making between now and July. Yeah, I mentioned the earlier meeting that we just had in late February. Tonight we're discussing transportation and parking, and you can see kind of the outline of upcoming agendas, focusing in April, where we're going to have 2 meetings. We're also in between there planning an open house, which the date and location are still to be determined, but another opportunity for everybody to access this information. And the one meeting I want to emphasize yet again is May 13th. This is going to be our final expanded working group meeting, but it's really there where a lot of the conclusions and recommendations and updates on all fronts are targeted to be presented. So everything we're hearing, the way in which we synthesize and kind of provide closure on those topics is going to be presented on May 13th. So that's going to be a really critical meeting that allows us to then progress to the request to advertise action in June and any kind of formal county board considerations in July. So with that behind us, we are now looking at all the policy documents that we've alluded to in the last 2 meetings, but focusing on the ones that involve or reference and inform the transportation discussion. So here we're going to have the 2 site-specific plans, the Columbia Pike Revitalization Plan from 2005. This is the one that looked at those commercial nodes and then intersections of Columbia Pike, and the Neighborhoods Area Plan from 2012 that looked at all the in-between residential portions of Columbia Pike and really has the predominant vision for Barcroft. In addition to that, Kristen's going to help us cover a lot of the Master Transportation Plan documents, which involve several sub-elements that have very unique focuses, and you'll see that approach and pattern kind of replicated in the J.R. Lynch presentation, just to kind of help us really organize our thoughts, organize all the different information that's available to us, because it could be very easily overwhelming. So this is how we're going to do that for tonight. I'm going to start with the 2 Columbia Pike documents. This is a very early one from the early 2000s. Might be a little bit difficult to read on the screen, but if you zoom in, it begins to give a sense, among other things, what the initial thinking was as it relates to the corridor, but specifically Barcroft property, about the street and bicycle and pedestrian connections. What could those be? Where are we identifying missing links? And what is that initial, idea of a vision for Barcroft as we move forward? So this was an initial starting point. Some additional thinking and subsequent planning efforts led to the Neighborhoods Area Plan development, again, focusing on the residential portions of the Columbia Pike corridor. And here's where we provide a lot more detail in terms of what could happen and what should happen along the corridor, but specifically the Barcroft apartments. You can see here in the legend, I do want to highlight 2 specific segments which talk about planned and potential pedestrian and vehicular connections. And those are something that are going to be surfacing as the presentations move on tonight. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Kristen and keep transitioning the slides.
Thanks, Matt. I'm Kristen Culkins. I'm a principal transportation planner with the Transportation Planning and Capital Projects Management Bureau within DES. I'm joined this evening by 2 other transportation planners within DES Transportation, Brian Shelton, also a member of the group I'm in, and Robert Gibson, who's part of our development review group. So as Matt alluded to, the 2 planning efforts that provided guidance for both the commercial areas and the neighborhood areas of Columbia Pike are represented in the MTP, the Master Transportation Plan map. So those networks, those roadways that were recommended as those from those 2 different planning efforts were integrated into our MTP map. as shown on this slide. These streets are really intended to help provide internal circulation and connectivity to the larger area surrounding Barcroft, and provide internal circulation for residents, visitors, workers, and people using multiple different modes, from pedestrians to cyclists and vehicles, especially as people access new buildings on the site. Next slide, please. The streets element just reflects kind of the status of the streets that surround the Barcroft site. We've got a number of principal arterials in the area. South George Mason and Columbia Pike both border and provide boundaries for Barcroft, and those are principal arterials connecting the site to areas of the county and the region. We've got 4 Mile Run Minor Drive, which is a local principal, which just provides more local access. And then there are also a number of local streets internally that provide circulation and connectivity to the larger network. Next slide. The bike element, like the MTP map, reflects some of those connections for bicyclists that were recommended as part of the 2 Columbia Pike planning efforts. You can see on this map that there's a new bicycle connection east-west internal to the site to help connect to the WNOD trail, primarily via a bike boulevard on 12th Street. And then there's also a north-south connection recommended in the plan that connects along South Wakefield Street to connect Barcroft to the Arlington Boulevard Trail and the Roslyn-Ballston corridor. Next slide. There's a robust amount of transit available in the area, both provided by ART and WMATA, that connects the Barcroft area to portions of the county as well as the region via bus transit. Bus service connects residents to Ballston and the Blue Orange Silver Line via the ART 72 on George Mason. Connections are available to Pentagon City, the Pentagon, DC, the Blue and Yellow lines via WMATA's 16 series service on Columbia Pike, which is one of the premium transit corridors and one of the major corridors in Arlington. And then there's also connections to Shirlington, its transit center, and other regional bus service via the ART 72 and the WMATA 22A. Next slide, please. There have been a number of transportation studies and investments made or happening in and around the Barcroft apartments. The first is the Columbia Pike Forward effort. Barcroft is situated on segment F. If anybody's been out in the area recently, it is an active construction zone. Those recommendations are being implemented today. It's really exciting to see. Right now, we're anticipating that construction should be completed by fall 2025. Following the completion of this segment, there'll be sidewalks, complete sidewalks on both sides of the street, 2 travel lanes in each direction. And there are also enhanced transit stops that are being constructed along the corridor. A complete station can be seen eastbound at South 4 Mile Run and westbound at South Buchanan. And there will be additional new transit station improvements included at South Thomas Street and at George Mason. The recently completed South George Mason multimodal study has a number of recommendations as well that relate to Barcroft and how it will connect to the larger area surrounding it. The study was actually recently completed at the end of 2023 and focused on improving bicyclist, pedestrian, transit, and driver safety and mobility along the corridor. It proposes improvements at major intersections like Columbia Pike and 4 Mile Run to improve safety for those modes, as well as improve operations and the progression of transit along some of the corridors. Proposed pedestrian crossing improvements are recommended to provide safety for those crossing South George Mason Drive, from Barcroft to bus stops and to Doctors Run Park. So those are new recommendations at 12th Street. And then there's also a shared use path that's recommended along the corridor, along the east side of George Mason Drive, completely separated from traffic to provide a safe and convenient connection from Wakefield High School, the WNOD, and the planned Columbia Pike Bike Boulevards all the way to Arlington Boulevard Trail. Next slide, please. So Jared Lynch's portion of the presentation will more clearly articulate what their transportation recommendations for the site are, but we want to talk a little bit about why some of those are being made or proposed and the context behind them. Next slide. As discussed in previous meetings, there is a private townhouse community that's been built after the adoption of the Columbia Pike plans. It did not take advantage of the opportunities provided in the form-based code. Rather, it developed by right. The construction inhibits the ability of the new 11th Street connection as identified in the neighborhood plan and as shown on the MTP map. So in response to this, Jared Lynch has proposed to modify the grid and have 12th Street serve as the major vehicular, pedestrian, and bicycle east-west connection for the site. They've also proposed modifications to other streets in the plan to facilitate the proposed redevelopment, including the elimination of a connection to 4 Mile Run Minor and the realignment of South Wakefield Street at Columbia Pike. Those are just some of the deviations that exist for the vehicle network between what the adopted policy guidance is and the proposed plan that they'll be presenting in a bit. Next slide. We also have some information about how we look to provide the bike connectivity through the site. Jared Lynch's proposal identifies 12th Street as the main bicycle connection through the site with a connection to the Washington and Old Dominion Trail. This connection, we want to just emphasize, will need to be designed considering the future context of 12th Street as the community redevelops. So making sure that that facility that's provided along 12th Street is safe and comfortable for people who are using it to connect to the greater bicycle network. Next slide. And then from a parking context, parking for residents and customers in the redevelopment areas is anticipated to be provided in structured and underground garages. So those are the red, blue, and yellow areas on the map. For the areas that will stay the same or in the preservation areas, it's anticipated that surface parking along the existing vehicular connections and in a number of retained parking lots will be the predominant way that those areas are parked. These are all topics that are going to be delved into in more detail in Jared Lynch's presentation, but it's the policy background and a little bit of the rationale about why things are different than some of the adopted policy that we've had, or just things to highlight and consider as Jared Lynch presents on their proposal.
Thanks, Kristen. Yeah, and the last thing I'll mention before handing things over to Jared Lynch is that what you'll notice in a lot of these exhibits, both from staff side and the Jared Lynch presentation, is that we are specifically looking at generally where do these networks, these various connections need to go, and first getting that information right before in the second half of the year, we can dive further into the specifics of something like a cross section and much more detailed information that simply is just not available at this moment because we're still moving streets around, figuring out where the bicycle connections need to be. So until we get those larger items done right, it can update the relative policy documents, then we can have that more detailed conversation in the second half of the year. I'm going to stop sharing now, and I see Lauren has her video. It is all yours.
Just a second while I bring up our presentation. All right, can you all see that?
Yep.
All right, thanks. Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm Lauren Riley with Walsh Colucci. We represent Jared Lynch Real Estate Partners. And tonight I'm joined by David Hildy and Greg Ward with Jared Lynch. And we also have Mike Pinkoski with BICA here to discuss our proposed transportation network. And he'll walk you through all of that in just a minute. But first, I'd just like to take you all back to this illustrative diagram that Matt Bell and Kathy showed you at our last meeting. This placemaking diagram here shows you how we plan to knit the proposed new development there at the George Mason Place and Wakefield Place nodes together with the existing fabric of Barcroft through that Barcroft crossing and amenity center section there. These elements together create a synergy throughout the site, and they connect, the existing neighborhood to the new development. And then just stripping that back a little bit as we start to talk about transportation and how people are going to navigate throughout the site, you can see here that 12th Street and South Thomas Street become the spines of Barcroft. They provide that main east-west and north-south connections throughout the site. And as Ms. Calkins was just talking about, this transportation network will also respond to that by right development along Columbia Pike that has occurred since the neighborhood's area plan and other planning documents were created. And so ultimately here, 12th Street and South Thomas Street are going to be the foundations of the transportation network that will take vehicles, pedestrians, bicyclists, not only in and around the site, but also through the site from other areas along Columbia Pike, 4 Mile Run, or South George Mason Drive. And I'll hand it over now to Mike Pinkowski with VICA. He's going to walk you through the existing plan and proposed connections for vehicles, pedestrians, and bicycle connections throughout the site. I'll also point out areas where we are proposing changes from the planned connections and why. So with that, Mike, take it away.
Hello, everybody. Thank you. As Lauren mentioned, I'm Mike Pinkowski. I'm the Director of Transportation at VICA. Apologize I don't have video capability this evening, but I am going to walk you through the transportation elements here. And it's important to note that, we're given a high-level overview, as Matt said, and it's important also to note that, all of these elements, streets, pedestrian mobility, bike mobility, have all been coordinated together. So no one single element is solely driving our proposed design and modifications that we're proposing. So what you're looking at here is the existing vehicular network. The orange highlighted roads are existing public streets, while the purple are existing vehicular connections, some of which are included in the master transportation plan and identified. But what we're highlighting in purple are really roads, parking lanes, parking fields, any existing vehicular connection that is provided through the Barcroft site. Next slide. So what this slide does is it layers on the existing recommendations of the form-based code in the master transportation plan, and those are indicated here with the dashed blue lines. Again, as Kristen and others have mentioned tonight, where you see the little red square next to South Taylor Columbia Pike intersection, that's where the 2 by right townhome strips are and the apartment building that we were looking for. I think the plan envisioned larger consolidation of this area, and for the reasons previously mentioned, they weren't brought in or they chose to develop on their own. But the roads dashed in are roads that are envisioned, like I mentioned, in the form-based code of the master transportation plan. So this slide highlights roads that are within the form-based code that we are currently proposing to eliminate or modify. Within the eastern node, which is on the top portion of the screen, closer to George Mason, you can see the red dashed line proximate to Columbia Pike, which represents the 11th Street extension that was contemplated. Due to that by right development and some topography constraints in certain areas, we're proposing for 11th Street to be that main east-west connection through the site. On this slide, you can also want to point out the light blue dashed lines are new vehicular connections that we're proposing as an alternative to the red, as well as you'll see the black closer dotted lines that are proposed alleys to help serve some of the buildings. As you move down to where Lauren has the cursor, where you see the X in the 2 red dashed lines, that was a realignment of Wakefield that was contemplated in the form-based code that from topography constraints, as well as some of the existing buildings that we're trying to retain, we've really shifted that focus of the east-west connection to 12th Street, where you can see the blue dashed line between some of those buildings. And then what we're calling the triangle piece on the plan south. Oh, one more thing. You can see that we are proposing to potentially eliminate the street that's between Wakefield and the 4 Mile Run minor connection. We've talked about this with staff. We do want to retain it as potential pedestrian connection, but we do believe that proximity to other adjacent intersections, that it could be potentially removed without major impact to the transportation network. Next slide. So here we're zooming in a little bit closer to the side I was just describing. And just to orient everybody, we're at what we call the eastern node, which is more proximate to the Columbia Pike South George Mason intersection. And again, here zoomed in closer, you can see on the right-hand side, we're proposing the removal of 11th Street, where it was previously contemplated in the plan, and really focusing on 12th Street. In the bottom left, Lauren, is there's a view from point A where the triangle is, and you can see some of the topography issues that I noted earlier. You know, at the base of that parking lot, you're at an elevation of 161, whereas at the top of the hill, you're at 194. So that's over a fairly short distance. That's roughly 33, 35 feet of grade change. And that's just one example of many locations on the site where there is significant grade change. And so here, this is the western node. So now we're closer to 4 Mile Run, west of South Thomas. Again, north is to the left of the page. But here again, you can see the comparison of, you know, the streets that we're removing in red to the blue dashed preference to make 12th Street that major east-west connection. And again, here, this slide doesn't do as much justice as the last one, but this is a view from an existing cul-de-sac within Barcroft, and you can see as you look at that picture, there are stairs going down, and the site falls away towards Wakefield. Again, significant grade change in that location.
And then Mike, we also don't have great photos of this too, but another reason for the removal of this connection here is also the severe grade change from Columbia Pike as you fall down toward 4 Mile Run.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, just while we're on this slide, I can just throw out some elevations just to kind of set the context. You know, South Thomas Street to the north of the plan is at an elevation of 200 to 192, whereas along 4 Mile Run, where the Wakefield connection is and where the red dashed line connects the 4 Mile Run, you're at a 129 and a 135. So you're seeing 60 to 70% grade change between 4 Mile Run and South Thomas Street. So any road connection across that, you know, there is significant topography to deal with. So this slide here really summarizes visually the existing parking that's out there today. We've looked at it in a couple of different ways. We have existing on-street parking within Barcroft, which is in the red color. The circles, which represent existing parking lots within Barcroft. The purple or rose color are the existing parking garages within Barcroft. And then the orange are all public streets in and surrounding Barcroft that have existing public on-street parking available to residents and others.
And as we work through,
yeah.
Oh, sorry, Mike, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say probably the same thing you were going to. You know, we understand that a lot of these areas are going to be impacted by the future redevelopment. We're continuing to study those areas where new development is occurring. We're evaluating the existing and future supplies for the conservation area as units and parking is being removed. And you know, we're working towards finding a solution so that the existing residents within the conservation area can retain a parking ratio generally close to what's out there today. So transitioning to bike circulation, here in green are existing bicycle facilities. You can see from this slide that there is currently no facilities through the core area of Barcroft. This slide highlights proposed master transportation plan bike elements. They're in the teal and yellow. You can see 12th Street contemplated through the Barcroft development, and then it makes a jog at Thomas to connect down to 4 Mile Run. Additionally, just on the boundary of the property, as Kristen mentioned earlier, there is a planned facility on the east side of South George Mason. And then I'll just also point out that 16th does have planned bicycle facilities, which goes through a portion of Barcroft site. So this slide highlights in green what is currently proposed as part of the bicycle transportation network through Barcroft, with the red dash being the deviation from the current master transportation plan. What we've chosen to do so far is to reroute that path in red to follow the improved 12th Street connection from George Mason to South Wakefield. An additional element to further enhance the bike network is the proposed connection from 4 Mile Run Minor to Columbia Pike along Wakefield to provide that connection, and then further along 4 Mile Run Minor to the W&OD Trail along that southern triangle or western triangle piece. So this slide here highlights in blue the main pedestrian sidewalk connections along either travel ways through Barcroft or along the public street network that goes through Barcroft. The bold blue lines represent where there are existing crosswalk facilities around the boundary of Barcroft on the public street network. One thing that we didn't highlight on this slide, but if you're familiar with Barcroft and if you look a little closer at the exhibit, is that there's a series and network of internal sidewalks that lead from each of the individual buildings to these main pedestrian connections. So this slide here is planned pedestrian connections. And really what the planned pedestrian connections are going to do is they're going to follow the proposed street grid. All new streets within Barcroft will have new sidewalks along with them. Additionally, there are 2 additional crossings of George Mason planned or proposed, one at 12th Street to continue that connection east of George Mason, and one at 13th Street. Yeah, there you go, right in the middle. So there'll be multiple connections proposed for future connectivity east-west across George Mason. And here's just a comparison of the proposed versus the master transportation plan. And the real key element here is the removal of the 11th Street pedestrian connection. There is a form-based code connection planned where between South Thomas and 4 Mile Minor that we do intend to keep. This would be a pedestrian connection and not a vehicular connection between the two. And then because we're proposing the extension and enhancement of 12th planned south or to the west of Thomas Street, we are proposing a pedestrian connection between South Thomas and Wakefield. And then of course, between where there's currently alleys proposed, and as I mentioned earlier, a pedestrian connection where there is previously a street in that southern triangle, there will be pedestrian and sidewalk connections in and around those buildings.
And then I'll just highlight too that as we're going through, we talked at our last meeting about some of the renovation use permits that we've been working on as this process is going forward. Every time we're doing one of those renovation use permits, where needed, we are repairing sidewalks throughout these existing garden apartments to remain. So those pathways through those individual buildings to the main network will remain.
And this last slide kind of just brings everything together. No real points to mention. This is more just for discussion if we need to come to it, but this really layers in all of the elements that we talked about on the previous slides.
Thanks, Mike. And I know everybody, this slide could be a little overwhelming with all the different colors that we're showing, but it really does show that at a high level, our team is thinking comprehensively about the various modes of transit throughout the site: vehicles, pedestrians, bicycles, and we're proposing a coordinated network that's going to support the existing buildings and the new buildings on those east and west nodes. And you'll see too that we're also providing connections not only in and around Barcroft, but we're also connecting to these wider networks offsite to help people, help folks come to and through Barcroft. So that concludes our presentation, and I'll hand it back now to Chair Berkey. Our team is available for any questions that you have.
Great, thanks, Lauren. So I think Matt, if you mind putting the slides back up, I think for our agenda.
Yep. There we go.
Okay, so let's start here. Are there any clarifying questions in response to either the staff or the Gyre Lynch presentations? If you've got one, go ahead and raise your hand now. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay, yeah. So a few questions. Real quick one. You all keep referring to 12th Street, which I assume is on the alignment of what's now currently 12th Road, just to be clear. And I've got questions for staff about the bike network. The bike element showed a potential bike facility on road on some extension of 12th Street, which I assume is a paper street because it doesn't exist now. Kind of need to know from staff whether that's actually in the plans to be connected as it's shown. So that's my first question. And then I've also got lots of questions about what the type of bike facility you're planning through the development is, but I'll stop and let you answer those first two questions.
Yeah,
why don't you get the first question, and we can loop back to the bike network. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah.
I was gonna do that. So it's at least Google Maps says 12th Street, and like that's what we've been referring to it as, is 12th Street. There's 13th Street and 13 Road. But when we talk about 12th, we talk about what had been the second of the two streets. So 11th had been in the plan as a new connection. 12th Street is now what that east-west connection is envisioned as.
Okay.
And there's only one 12th in the plan. So if
Right,
there's
that's
nomenclature
fine,
as far as road versus street, there's only one 12th that we're talking about.
That's fine. Then I guess the question to county transportation staff, is there a plans to actually put a connection through to Quincy as you're kind of indicating on the map?
That's in the plan. That's in the, it's in both, it's in the Columbia Pike plans, and then it's also in our MTP map to create some sort of connection east-west across George Mason.
Okay, so across Doctors Run Park, or the north edge of Doctors Run Park.
North edge, not through the park.
Okay. Okay, and you're showing a lot of crosswalks. Are they all going to get hawk signals like the current crosswalk does, or are they just going to be crosswalks in the middle of the block?
That's a bit more operational than the planning level that we're at right now.
Okay, and I guess, well, that's a comment, not a question. I'll save it for later. So and then I guess the question would be, what the bike facilities would look like, and maybe that's too detailed for this level.
Yeah. We are, I'll say that any facility that we do, be it a crosswalk or a bike facility, we're planning on designing intentionally to make sure that they meet the safety needs of whatever the context around them is. So if a crosswalk is at a location where it needs a hawk signal from a safety perspective, that's all something we'll work through as this process evolves. But right now we're at a higher level talking about what will be there. And then we'll get into details after we agree on kind of the concepts about what those facilities actually need to be
I'm sorry, what?
further on.
Yep, you sure can.
All right, great, Kristen. We'll go to Commissioner Weir and then Commissioner Howell. If folks can just for posterity's sake, if you don't mind just reintroducing yourself and your affiliation. So we'll go to Commissioner Weir first.
Hi, Daniel Weir, Planning Commission and the Area Working Group. Can we see the slide 17 of the applicant's presentation, please? Thank you. Great. Thank you so much. So I see there's a pedestrian 1 minute, Martin, sorry. There's a pedestrian connection going through the lower left corner, which would be the westernmost corner, right? You know, we can call it the Cezanne area. I'll call it the Cezanne block for, you know, just ease of identification. And then if you look at slide 13, which is the bike connection, right? You see that we can see where there is a pedestrian connection through that block that is not also a cycling connection. And I want to get a sense of how you would describe the difference between the built environment, the hardscaping, et cetera, that would make it a pedestrian connection, but not a bike connection. And is the idea that it would not be accessible to cyclists, or is it that it would not be designed for cyclists primarily? When we get to the comments, I might have more to say about this, or someone else might as well, but I just wanted to get a sense of what the applicant and staff perhaps think are the differences between these two, like the actual, you know, as I see it and walk through it and experience it, differences. I'm going to go off mute and off camera, on mute and off camera. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Weir. I'll just elaborate a little bit. Why you're not seeing a bike facility connection through this way, but you are seeing a pedestrian connection, and I'll go back quickly to our vehicular connection slide, is that we're proposing alleyways here through the western triangle, the Cezanne block, as you called it. These will be service alleys to serve these 3 buildings here. They will have sidewalks, so that pedestrians will be able to access 4 Mile Run, Columbia Pike, and Wakefield through those service alleys, but it's not designed for a bike facility.
Thank you very much. That's informative. Thank you.
All right, we'll go to Commissioner Howell and then Mr. Snyder.
Yeah, thank you. My question is similar to Commissioner Weir's question and it's about the intersection of pedestrian and bicycle and vehicular infrastructure, and the fact that in real life the pedestrian and vehicular infrastructure is pretty well governed because of the crossings and that kind of thing. But plenty of bicyclists use pedestrian facilities. They're not necessarily primarily designed for bikes, and bicyclists also have to navigate, of course, streets. So I guess I'm not being an expert on the transportation issue. I just wonder if everyone I guess the question is, how are the designs going to allow the safe and sort of expanded use of all forms of mobility on this sort of topographically challenged place? Are we going to be having, like, you know, the intersections for pedestrian and bicycle facilities sort of expanded for people with a, you know, stroller to get sort of out of the way of the through commuters? It seems to me that I'm always running into the local versus through traffic challenge, where you know, there are goals in designing bicycle facilities that are mostly about having those being good alternatives to cars. But then on the other hand, you know, you've got the speed differences between people walking slowly, whether it's older people or whether it's kids or whether it's, you know, families with babies and stuff. And those are all using the same space. So this is a very dense area. It's got a lot of topography. I'm hoping that this isn't, that this can be not a cookie cutter when you get down to the actual designing of this, of the actual features, that it's very much about the livability as well as the safety and the pleasantness versus the efficiency of the space. If that makes any sense, there probably are terms of art that would be better used by someone who knows more about this, but I do feel like this can be a challenge, but also a terrific opportunity to make using any mode of transportation better than it usually is in most places.
So I'll take that.
Sure.
And for lack of a better term, yes. So we recognize that there's a lot of opportunity to consider the different modes that are going to use this site holistically. We are still working through with J.R. Lynch what that could be based on kind of what their building form is, how different connections are made. But again, not an eloquent answer, but yes, we really do want to make sure that we're intentional with how these facilities are designed to make sure that people who are using them are comfortable, that they feel accommodated, and that it serves the needs of both residents and people who are accessing through the site. We don't know what that answer is yet, but those are things that we really are considering and taking into consideration as we have continued conversations about the site.
Yeah, I think if I can just piggyback on that, this is, I think, exactly why we need to just first isolate all the networks, but then start to, as we run out of colors, overlay them on top of each other to see, are any kind of natural conflicts arising. And I think many of us are going to continue to revisit these diagrams in 3 weeks when we're diving into the open space and maybe some emerging destinations that are starting to develop on the site. Are those informing how we feel about the network even further?
Great. I'm going to go to Mr. Snyder next.
Thanks, Commissioner Berkey. I'm John Snyder from the Columbia Pike Partnership. First, a reminder that we would all love a walking tour as part of this process. And second, forgive me if I've missed this in the presentation, but is the plan to keep with the neighborhood form-based code parking ratios for the new buildings, both for the market rate and for those that are preserved in the new buildings? I only heard about the plan for the preserved buildings, which sounded like it was to keep the parking ratio basically the same, but how about the new buildings?
I'll jump in here, Mr. Snyder. The statement about the parking ratios was more to state our intention of providing the same or similar amount of parking for existing residents who will remain in those renovation areas. As far as parking ratios for the future, whether or not we'll be using the existing form-based code ratio. That's still a little too detailed for this level that we're at. We are going to continue to analyze the parking demand for the existing residents as while we also design parking for the new developments, and we'll have more information for you all on that once we get further through the process.
So Mr. McCullough, I see you're next. Do you mind identifying the stakeholder group you're representing? Because I do not see you on my roster.
Okay. Sorry, I should be on there. I represent Barcroft School and Civic League.
Okay, great.
I missed the very first meeting, but was here last meeting. So yeah, if we could pull up the Jair Lynch presentation again, and I think slide 9 is the one I had a question about. And this would be for the VICA, I think.
You said slide 9.
I think so. That's what I noted when yeah, this will do. So in red, 11th is being basically not used and closed. I understand that. And part of the reason for that was that, this is from George Mason down to Thomas. Part of that is because it was very steep grades, right? The grade changes. So I guess I had a question about 12th, which in blue there shows to be continued. And I think that's a really important connection, right? These connections are really critical, both vehicular and bicycle and pedestrian connections to make a network here. So that's a critical one, but is that also have, significant grade issues? Have we calculated kind of what the grade changes are for that one? And is it really viable?
Mike, I'll recognize you to talk about the feasibility of the proposed roads. I think we've studied this, and they are feasible. But Mike,
yeah, we have studied it. There is still some grades for that light blue dashed area, but we believe that it is more feasible than some of the other alternatives previously discussed and shown here. Even Wakefield itself does have some grade change, especially as you get closer to 4 Mile Run. So where we tie into Wakefield will be important to minimize the grade change that's happening east-west.
Yeah, I just, I see. It's just, I see it seems like approximately the same grade differential and a shorter distance, which means higher grade, percentages. But if you looked at it, that's great. I just feel it feels anti-intuitive to me that it's any better than 11th. Because I think that drive, the purple is relatively flat, and then it goes up. But that's fine. That's if we've studied it, that's great. But I do think that's an important connection, and we should really make sure we know that that's viable.
Yeah, I mean, each of those purple elements, as they move away from South Thomas, are following towards Wakefield and 4 Mile Run. And your point is valid. There is grade everywhere here. Where you see the 2 red crosshatch roads intersecting, between that point and South Wakefield, which is very close, you see that there's about 20 feet of existing fall through there. So that's a very short link where you would see upwards of 10% slope. So what we're trying to do is cut across that slope with blue and trying to minimize topographic changes through there.
Okay.
Great. All right, I think let's do this. It's about 8 o'clock now. So we've got 4 topics. I think the first one is the vehicular network. So I think we'll try to spend around 10-ish minutes on each. So that'll be the first topic. So if folks have questions or comments they'd like to make about Jair Lynch's proposed vehicular network, form-based code, what have you, go ahead. I'm going to go with Robert Gibson. Go ahead.
Apologies, I meant to lower my hand. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Going once. And twice. We can, folks don't have comments. We can move along to the bike now. Oh, I see Mr. McCullough. Go ahead.
Well, I wasn't going to comment twice in a row, but since no one else is talking,
Oh,
and this is, I
feel
guess,
free.
sort of a general comment. I saw, and I'm not going to make you pull up the slides again, but I saw a number of the connections to Columbia Pike that were proposed previously in either the form-based code or the transportation plan. And I understand the reasons, the new construction and all, they've been reduced. I think there were 5 originally contemplated through this, and maybe 2 or 3 remain. And again, it's just a general comment. I'm strongly supportive of as many of those connections as possible. If we can, somehow get past the edge of that of the new townhouses and still make a connection to Columbia Pike or whatever it is, the more we concentrate vehicular traffic in 2 or 3 connections to Columbia Pike, obviously the less network is like it is, and the more potential for poor performance and all of that. So it's just and I understand exactly why it's happening, but I would really like to see as many connections as possible on Columbia Pike. And I know there's grade changes too. I'd like to see as many. I mean, I think from a vehicular point of view, we're sort of maxed out onto George Mason too, but I guess my comment will include, also bike and pedestrian connections, and we can talk about that when that comes up.
Great. We'll go to Commissioner Slatt next.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to say I think that I'm comfortable with the changes to the vehicular network largely. I do think the loss of 11th Street, I'm glad to hear that staff is talking about what the bike facility may need to be on 12th, because I think the loss of 11th means it's unlikely to be able to function as a bike boulevard. I think that puts more potential traffic going forward on 12th because 11th is not going to exist. And I do think it's great to see what I kind of think of as Taylor getting connected through to the Pike. My understanding there, I think that makes up for a lot of the loss of the other sort of side streets that were contemplated to connect to the Pike under the form-based code. So all in all, pretty happy with and comfortable with the changes to the vehicular network. Thank you.
Thanks. Commissioner Hanna?
Yeah, I'm kind of jumping on the bike thing. I'm not sure if we successfully change subjects or not, but if we are, Mike Hanna, BAC and PAC rep. Yeah, so I am a little concerned. 12th Street is pretty steep as it is now. I'm assuming the alignment stays the same as it is currently. So I think getting those facilities right is critical, both coming up off of George Mason and down the other way. I am concerned unless we change the character, and I think we're still looking at a 4-lane George Mason, of having that many crosswalks as you're currently proposing. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see the vehicles slow down enough to allow for that many crosswalks, but without signals, I am a little concerned that those might not be safe crossings. As I brought up before, I'm also concerned that we develop this concept and then the county never builds the connection at 12th Street to Quincy. If so, then this whole bike network is kind of hanging out there, unfinished and really not accessible from bikes. And I was wondering if there's a way to develop a secondary network that would be connected to the existing Hawk signal at 13th Road and then down Taylor. The advantage of that is it doesn't have the grade that going up 12th Street all the way up and then back down has now, which I'm assuming you're not changing grades much, so we would be stuck with it that way. In terms of accessing through the site, that's much easier grade. And it has an existing George Mason crossing, which right now we don't have under the proposed. But otherwise, I'm glad to see what you've done. And it's going to be critical that the facilities be designed right, especially when you're sort of zigzagging at the other end of the site going down towards 4 Mile Run.
Thank you. And I think we'll just transition to bikes because that was the next category. So I don't know, Commissioner Slatt. Oh, you took your hand down. So I'll go ahead and I'm going to put myself on the list there. I think I would associate myself with the comments Commissioner Hanna just made. I would also like to see there be more of an emphasis on trying to connect 12th Street. I think that's important, but I also share the same concerns about the grade change. And so I'd like to see us provide more effort there. I'm also cognizant right now that's an interesting area even before you hit the grade change in Doctors Run Park, because we've got we've got a volleyball court there that's pretty well used during warm months, and that's right next to what's currently the staging site for Pike Forward. So I personally would be amenable to, even if we had to have like a path go around that or something to accommodate park use, but I think that's important that we pursue that. I'm going to go to Commissioner Slatt next.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I have similar concerns. I know staff's response, is that this line has existed on the form-based code map to go through the northern edge of Doctors Run Park for a long time now. But this proposal is what's going to make it needed. It was never a high priority because the bike boulevard never got you any further because Barcroft was this giant barrier to moving via walking or biking. And now we have the potential for it not to be. So I think it's understandable that everybody is like, okay, well, is the county actually willing to make this connection at the northern edge of the park? So I think that's why that is getting brought up. And I would love to hear from somebody in DPR to actually confirm that that's something that is willing to move forward. And then I will say on the west end of the bike of this proposal, kind of building on Commissioner Weir's question from earlier, I do kind of wonder if it wouldn't be, let me put it a better way. I feel like it would be a better connection if it were to follow that service road between the buildings in that western kind of Wakefield area of redevelopment, the Saison block. 4 Mile Run Minor is not a great place to bike right now. Maybe the plan is to make it a better place to bike, but I don't love that we have this strip of that bike connection on 4 Mile Run Minor. I feel like it might be better to make a connection between those buildings to get that connection to the W&OD when it finally comes up to the grade of 4 Mile Run Minor there. I think those are my main bike. I feel like I had one.
Maybe that's, I don't know if that's Commissioner Slatt's internet. So Kristen, I saw you had your hand up, so I don't know if you want to respond.
I just wanted to make a small clarification from a staff's perspective. So that 12th Street road, because it actually has a few names, I did a little digging and it changes names in a few spots. We don't envision that taking anything from Doctors Run Park. So the parcel that is currently the staging ground, that's currently the 7-Eleven, if and when that redevelops, that extension of 12th there will serve both vehicular and bike pedestrian connectivity. So it's not incumbent on the county to do something with Doctors Run Park. Long term, there could be a need for intermediary or interim connections if that parcel or connecting parcels take a long time to redevelop, but it's not intended to need space from the park. So we've talked about this with DPR. That connection is really intended to happen as part of redevelopment under the vision for the plans.
Are there other staff or the Giant Lynch team? Anyone else care to weigh in? Don't have to. Just want to give you the opportunity. I want to take a second before I hit Commissioner Weir. Is there anyone on the phone who has a question or comment that I've neglected to provide an opportunity if you'd like to make a question or comment, just chime in. Okay, hearing no one, I'm going to go to Commissioner Weir then.
Thank you for pushing two things just a little bit on as far as 4 Mile Run is concerned, 4 Mile Run minor. You know, once upon a time, I used to take the 16Y regularly. If I were to be cycling anywhere around 4 Mile Run minor, and I thought that there were going to be buses queuing up there, I would bike through the service road rather than up to Columbia Pike, rather than trying to negotiate what looks like a queue of buses or even people getting on or off buses on 4 Mile Run minor. And unless there is an anticipated long-term or medium-term change in 1 second, Myron, in how things work. Myron, I'm speaking right now. I'll get to you later. Then okay. Then, you know, just from if nothing else, from a harm reduction perspective, you know, what Commissioner Slat's talking about, I think is worth really looking at. Is just given that people are going to be biking through that service alley, you know, we probably would be best served by treating it as where people are going to be biking and sort of meeting them there. As far as Doctor's Run is concerned, you know, a nice interim condition would be, and my apologies if someone has raised this and I've missed it, you know, in lieu of waiting until the Penske site goes, there is a spur off of the Doctor's Run Park Trail, and it would be very nice if we would be able to connect that in some way to the 12th Road Bike Boulevard, if that's an alternative to waiting for connectivity along the southern part of that Penske site parcel. That's all. Thank you.
Great.
And maybe just to clarify, the Penske site is part of the larger Barcroft ownership that is now under Gyre Lynch's control. But I think at this point, and I don't want to put the applicant on the spot, it's unclear when that phase of development, I think, would come forward. But it is something that I think we have greater control over now.
Yeah, no, just David Hildy with Gyre Lynch. Yeah, I just want to add that we do control that site, so we do control the ability to, and we want to extend 12th across. I think where the challenge comes, has been alluded to by staff, that doesn't make the connection. There's the Quebec apartments that are in between, which is more the problematic connection that we do not control. So yes, long term, it's great to get that connection. We want to plan for that on our Penske site, but I think, you know, they just want to make clear that there's a bigger property in between us, preventing that connection from happening until that gets redeveloped.
Thanks, David. Are there any more questions regarding the bike elements? Oh, I saw Saul raise his hand, but he lowered it.
It wasn't regarding the bike element, but a general that involves the Dr. Run's Park and residents at Barcroft.
Why don't we just we'll transition to the pedestrian network, and why don't we just park? Why don't you go ahead? We'll
sure.
Talk about it then. Go ahead. Oh, you're on mute, Saul.
Sorry, I didn't realize we were jumping to that.
No,
so
you're putting you on the spot. Go ahead.
Thank you. So basically, the issue I want to raise up is a problem that's currently occurring, but that could potentially also exist in the future, and that's that at tenant council meetings, numerous residents have raised the concerns about parking issues on 12th Street. And what they've reported is that park users often occupy tenants' parking spaces on 12th Street, then leaving residents struggling to find parking when they return home. And so currently, in response to those concerns, the parking policy was adjusted to begin towing enforcement at 6 p.m. instead of the previous 9 p.m. However, that's causing issues. This change has led to inconvenience for both residents and their visitors. So something to consider here is availability of parking for users at Doctors Run Park who drive there. So looking at something on street or building some parking for community members who will make use of Doctors Run Park.
I don't know if Matt, if you're going to respond to that, but we can keep going to, is it Miss Audant?
It's Odant, and thank
Odant.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Karen Odant, and I represent the Disability Advisory Commission, and I applaud staff and Geraldine. She made some references about smoothing out steps where there's severe grade change, and I'm just curious when like those specifics will be made available.
Yeah, I can jump in there. Are you referencing like the sidewalks among the individual apartment buildings?
Yeah, within the site. Yeah.
Yeah. So every we've gone through a couple of use permits now. So every use permit, every phase that comes forward of those renovations, that's where we take the deep dive into where the repairs we're making. As you may know, we're looking at accessible units where possible on each of these phases. So it's really a kind of a phase by phase analysis. We get into those details, and that's in the use permit process that you can kind of see a lot of those details get put into plan.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Slack, go ahead.
Thank you. On the pedestrian side of things, if you look at the proposed future pedestrian network, there's kind of an obvious no man's land where nothing connects in what I consider kind of the southeast corner of the main Barcroft network. So west of George Mason Drive and north of 4 Mile Run in that corner. And I know there's a lot of steep topography there, but it seems like there's an opportunity for a pedestrian connection that it would be stairs, probably. But that would be very useful. There's already an existing set of steps that come up from George Mason Drive to what I kind of consider Taylor Street extension. It's not an actual public road, but it kind of comes off of Taylor. You just can't get from there, that portion of Taylor up to kind of that next vehicular area, kind of at the top of the hill. But it seems like there's some opportunities on either side of the set of garages that are there to make that connection. I was just wondering if that's something that might be possible, could be looked at, if it's already been looked at, because there's just kind of a very obvious lack of permeability for a pedestrian there, and it impacts not just neighbors trying to get through the site, but also residents trying to get to other parking spaces and other parts of the complex, and it will impact people trying to get to the future amenities in Barcroft and that sort of thing.
Yeah, maybe to address that, if we could have maybe the pedestrian network exhibit get pulled up.
Yeah, let me bring up our slides again.
Yeah, and while we're bringing that up, yeah, that's a good example of when we put, so that there is that area there is part of our first renovation use permit. So as we went through that, we did identify, is there a possibility to make a connection up through between there, the couple, and so actually there is a tree preserve area, and then also if you go further up, that's where if you guys have seen or heard of the slope failure, that's where that's occurred. We are trying to get a path through that preservation area up. So, but in terms of stairs or something more substantial, a lot of that's a preserve area, so we want to be sensitive to that. But try to, I think that the comment of trying to make connections where we can, that was one thing that was highlighted by brought up by staff in our review, and thought was a great idea, and that is something that we're trying to make a connection up through that hill, that preserve.
Yeah, and I'll just to piggyback off what David's saying, there's a very steep hill between where this parking is right here behind this building, and then going down to that area where these buildings and garages used to be. So there really is a limited opportunity to go north-south in this area of the site.
I put myself next. So Lauren, if you could bring your cursor back, what about the area slightly north and slightly, it's not really north. Yeah, slightly, I guess it'd be slightly north and slightly east. So if you go left a little bit, if you go a little bit left, like what about this area? Because I definitely associate myself with Commissioner Slatt's concerns about the pedestrian connectivity, because when I was able to join the residents at the Residents Council meeting last week, and staff was there, and I think there was a really productive conversation, and we heard a lot of concerns about the availability of parking. But my comment's not really about parking. It's, of course, it's about like access to the sites, and you know, if folks are searching for parking, or they're home late, they're working irregular hours, it's on the weekend, like it would be, I think, essential to make sure that if they have to be on Taylor, but they need to make it, you know, over here, or they need to make it Thomas or whatever, that we provide maybe a bit easier of pedestrian connections. You know, I don't think it's just the amount of parking. I think it's the quality of the options, right? Especially when it's dark at night, you know, just, you know, safety concern, you know, things like that. So I don't know what the grade is kind of over in this other area here that's a little bit north, a little bit east, but if we could, yeah, like in this
Right
area,
here.
a little bit more north, yeah.
Yeah, so actually, if you go further north than that,
North
there's
or
actually
left. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
yeah, there is a path, there is a sidewalk there. We haven't
Okay.
highlighted it, but you can kind of see underlying there. Sorry,
Okay.
Lauren, go down to Taylor. There is a Taylor to that Taylor connection. Lauren, if you go back by, if you remember where building 48 is, that long
Sorry,
straight
here.
building. And then behind that build to the left. Oh, and there's, you can see
you're
right
talking about
there.
this
Yes,
one?
yes. So there's so that's an example. There is a connection there internal to these buildings. We haven't highlighted it. But there are various connections that, you know, there's some that don't show up on here too, that do try to traverse these hills with steps. But
Yeah.
you know, we can get more.
Then there's also sidewalks along these drive aisles where there's parking as well.
Okay.
Yeah, well,
But
not
thank
everywhere. I
you.
mean, that is part of the challenges.
Yeah.
I think, like right there where you were showing, Lauren, that there's
Yeah.
a high retaining wall that makes that impossible to traverse. So these are all aspects that we're trying to make sure, again, in every use permit, any of these connections within the renovations, doing everything we can to strengthen them, repair them, and sustain them. And this is kind of showing the bigger connections that we'll be planning as well with the new streets and footprints.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, David. All right, I'm going to go to Commissioner Hanna, and then we'll keep going down our list here. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just sort of jumping on that is when you guys repair the slope failure, is your intention to reopen Taylor Street all the way through? And if you do that, are there opportunities to improve sort of pedestrian and even bike access through that Taylor Street area? As I said earlier, that the nice thing about Taylor Street is it kind of traverses the edge of the site without having to go up and over the hills that you do in the other direction.
Right.
So
And just
we are looking opportunities to either to relocate parking, provide sidewalks as we go through that. I think ultimately there are a couple pinch points that are outside the slope failure, like where we were looking before. There are a couple pinch points that do make it difficult to make it continuous. But wherever we can, we are trying to make sure that we're making sure parking's as getting the parking we need to in there, and any connections. Taylor, though, just again, this section where you guys have noticed that the lack of connections being shown here, that's that road is just the road out situated, the retaining walls that are there makes it very difficult to make that a meaningful connection. We do want to make it as much of a connection as we can.
Okay. Thanks.
Mr. Bastidas, and then Miss I think is it Geertzy? Sorry, go ahead.
Hello. Sorry, I was trying to turn on my camera. I have a question regarding the parking garages. will those be removed or will those stay? Just because considering if they were removed, that would create a lot more parking space in the area where they are. But just question regarding that.
Sure. Several of the parking garages will be removed to accommodate the new development nodes where we are proposing new development. There are a few that will stay. There's a historic preservation piece of this as well. In order, we'd like to preserve some of those existing garages to remain as part of the historic accessory structures along Barcroft. And then the reality is, I think we're only going to retain about 3 of them because others have already been demolished through that slope failure that we were just talking about, or will have to be removed to accommodate new buildings. Though I think David, you all have studied those garages and determined folks are using them for vehicle parking, right? Or they're leased for.
Yeah, we the majorities are actually leased for vehicles. I do, again, that's not necessarily a resident living right there next to their unit. We have studied the efficiency of changing those to spaces. Given that they are smaller garages, you don't necessarily pick up a lot of additional spaces, assuming those garages do. But I think Lauren covered it well. We tried to balance. We do want to preserve a couple stretches of garages in the original section 1, just to preserve those accessory structures, and then in other areas like a parking area off of South Thomas Street, where we will take those away to reconfigure the parking and provide more parking for residents.
Great. Miss, is it Guernsey? Guernsey?
Yeah, Guernsey is right. Yeah. Hi, Kathy Guernsey, Columbia Forest. So Matt's comment earlier about wanting to see maps that were overlaid so you can start to see the convergence of these various networks got me thinking about a previous meeting where there had been reference to some of the accessible apartments that would have a higher degree of accessibility for example, wheelchair users or other people who might need more mobility accessibility. So it would be helpful, I think, at a future time when it's a bit more ripe, to be able to see those units overlaid with some of these parking and vehicle and pedestrian access maps. And I'm also thinking in particular of individuals who might not need that level of physical accessibility in their apartment, but may have a disability such that it's difficult for them to walk a long distance. And I'm wondering if there's any way to make provision for them, mindful of the comments earlier about difficulties in finding parking. If you have an individual who doesn't need like a wheelchair accessible parking spot, but really needs to guarantee that their parking spot is not too far away from their apartment where they don't have to walk terribly far, is there any flexibility that could be built in on the roads to designate an on-street parking spot for that individual in the future so that they know that they'll be able to park proximate to their apartment? So again, I know this is probably a bit early days yet, but just wanted to flag those issues for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. I have one question myself, and this sort of isn't totally transportation related. I apologize, but there's really no other way to fit it in here. I'm curious. So thinking back about 12th Street, we've heard a lot of concerns about Commissioner Slatt specifically and others about how, because we're not doing 11th Street, we are essentially, the proposal does put a lot more pressure on 12th Street, as a bike boulevard, as a major, I think we referred to it, Lauren, I think you referred to it as one of the spines, of the proposal here. I guess part of my question is, thinking about, I'm looking back on like slide 3, for example, of the Gyro Lynch presentation. I'm thinking about the level of, redevelopment there. There's the amenity center on 12th. Is there anything that at this point would be specifically would be different about like the sidewalks or the pedestrian experience like on 12th Street versus like any of the other existing sidewalks or other sidewalks in the property? I'm just trying to visualize this and get a sense. I was looking at the MFDP again, the Master Development and Financing Plan again, and obviously there's some great visuals in there, but what is, sort of what's the proposed kind of pedestrian experience? Because I'm looking at 12th Street and I'm thinking of this is kind of a main Broadway, a main kind of, a showcase, whatever you want to call a street, right? Spine of this project. So what does that experience sort of look like if I'm walking down 12th?
Right. I'll take a stab at this, Commissioner Berkey. I think your question's starting to get into the detailed analysis of what those street sections are going to look like coming forward, but I understand you're trying to get an idea of how people are going to navigate with those kind of 3 different modes of transit happening along 12th Street. You're right, it is taking on quite a lot, but it'll, as Ms. Calkins indicated earlier, we'll be working with staff to make sure that the facilities proposed on 12th Street are going to be comfortable for whoever's using them, vehicles, pedestrians, or bikes. And so whether or not those are all separated, how they're integrated and work together, we'll be thinking about that as we move forward. And we should be able to provide a little more information, on how that's going to break down in one of our later meetings.
I appreciate that. I understand that's getting the details, but I do think that sort of the vision kind of and what that experience is, I think is pretty relevant to our conversation here. And, I've been trying to talk to residents and other folks in the community, as part of the effort outside these meetings. And one of the things that I've sort of heard is, some folks are interested in, having a little bit of that, small village experience along like a 12th Street, right? And not necessarily being, dark, but there being a little bit of activity and it being a place they feel a little bit more comfortable walking. And so I'll just leave you with that thought. Obviously, the details have to get worked out, but from the folks I've talked to in the community, I think that there is some interest in that. I will. You don't need to respond to that. I'm going to go to Commissioner Howell, and then I think we're going to move along to talking about parking.
Thank you very much. Yeah, this last topic, I think, we're starting to get to something I was trying to say a little bit more clearly earlier, but there's the interactions of different modes of transportation that are of concern and interest in terms of design, but there's also the context. And so since Matt's there, I just wanted to put in a big pitch as a segue between tonight's meeting and the next meeting, that we take a real look at how the green ribbon concepts of the Pentagon City sector plan might be applicable. I'm talking about the concepts, not the specifics, because this is the opposite of Pentagon City in terms of the actual physical features. But the idea that you can create a usable, safe, happy, interactive, multimodal system by thinking about how those spaces actually are pleasant to use and have positive interactions with our stormwater issues. All this topography is going to be both a challenge and an opportunity in terms of things that DES is doing with rain gardens and streetwise stuff with vegetation, and that can be done as part of landscaping as well as part of streetscaping. So there are some great opportunities, I think, here to sort of tap down some of the more difficult parts of the topography and of the interactions. And I know that a lot of this will be part of the next discussion, but I just wanted to put it in for tonight as transportation doesn't exist in a vacuum, and how it's functional is the important topic tonight, but how it feels to use is an important topic for next time. Thanks.
Yeah, go ahead, Matt, if you'd like to respond.
No, I really appreciate, I think, a lot of the recent comments, because a lot of what we are gearing up for in mid-May, when I think our plan is to come back and touch on really all of the topics we're hearing throughout February, March, and April, is to figure out, with the limited information and guidance we can establish in the first half of the year, does that collectively go far enough to establish a clear vision for I think what we're trying to achieve on Barcroft. And it's really going to be important to establish that and make it very clear to everyone so that the second half of the year and even 2025, because this is not going to stop in December, has very specific objectives and I think direction that we need to take. And all the decisions that have to be made between, let's say, August of this year and 2025, 26 are reflecting back on a lot of the things and themes that we're hearing about. So we're going to definitely take a lot of good notes and hopefully come back as this process concludes and see if we got it right and if it all makes sense.
Great. Well, I think that's a good transition to our last topic of the evening, which is parking, which is certainly something that's been oft discussed, I know, by residents. So let's take about 10, 15 minutes on this, and then we want to allow a little bit of time for public comment and concluding remarks. So we'll go with Mr. Snyder and then Mr. McCullough. Go ahead.
Thanks, Commissioner Berkey. On parking, I asked the question earlier whether the plan was to keep with the neighborhood form-based code parking ratios, and I was hoping for just a simple and comforting yes. I know this is in early stages, but I think this is an issue that can quickly become a problem. We all love the Pike. We all love our diversity, but what's really important is that we get along. And parking creates conflicts. It has created a lot of conflicts in my neighborhood of Douglas Park. It's created conflicts, everywhere else. And so it's something that we have to pay very close attention to so that we do not create a conflict between this development and the surrounding neighbors. Speaking from experience as a civic association president, when this plan was put together, it was with much more robust transit than we have now or will have in the foreseeable future. There was going to be a streetcar, right? That was canceled after this plan was put in place. So taking away, you've got two elements of how to deal with the transportation demand from this project. One of the elements is the transit, and that's been reduced. The other is the parking ratio. And so reducing both of them is not, it's not in keeping faith, frankly, with the people who put the plan together. And as I mentioned, can create a great deal of conflict. So it's something that, I understand it has a cost like everything else that we're discussing, but it's something that's very important to make sure that all the goals of the project are met, including a harmonious relationship with the rest of the Pike community.
Thanks, Mr. Snyder. Mr. McCullough.
Well, of course, I'm going to piggyback on that. And our neighborhood in Barcroft here, of course, every time I tell anyone that I'm involved in this or just walk down the street with the dog, that's the first thing anyone talks about, right? It's the parking. And right across Columbia Pike, especially people in our neighborhood that's nearest the Pike, they're very concerned with this. So I have a couple of, so I want to reinforce Mr. Snyder's discussion there. I think the parking ratios are important. I'd like to hear more detail. I saw on Jair Lynch's presentation, sort of dots that showed where parking is. And I know this will come on and be developed, and it's probably down the line, but it is such a critical part of the neighborhood's feelings about the project that I'd like to see it developed more sooner than later. And that is, what are the real numbers? How many spots are here? How many spots are there in each of those different locations, and how are they going to be preserved or not? There's a lot of changes in the road system. The biggest, I think, parking area is currently on 12th, and it looks like the character, and of course it interacts with open space, because you'd like it to have less parking and more park-like, green areas. But so there's a huge balance. And I understand how difficult it is, but really like to analyze this in more depth. And to add just a little nuance to that, there's the other thing is that we have 1,335 units, but some of them are now going to be 3 and 4 bedrooms. So there's actually an addition and more a higher population, even though the same number of units. So there could be parking number of parking spaces issues with that too, as perhaps someone in a family in a 4-bedroom might have 2 cars instead of 1, and so forth. So I'd just like to reinforce that I think the analysis and the more detail about that, the sooner will go a long ways to alleviate any stress and worries in our neighborhood's thought process.
I think those are reasonable requests, and I know some work has already begun on that as staff is conducting their analysis and collaborating with Jar Lynch. So I think we can take that back and see if something can be produced. Some of what I think you referenced is an evolving element, as I forget who it was, David or somebody else mentioned. We are progressing with kind of incremental use permits to gradually preserve, right, different aspects of the property. As that happens, from time to time, parking remains unchanged. Sometimes it's restriped. But I think we can provide at least a snapshot of where we are in spring of 24 to allocate and identify where the private parking spaces are and where we have on-street parking in the public roadways, all of which are likely being utilized by residents and visitors. And I think to Mr. Snyder's earlier comment, at this point, we are not aware that any new parking ratios are being sought or proposed with this MFDP. I will reference that the Neighborhoods Farm-Based Code has 2 ratios. There's a market rate unit minimum ratio for residents and a separate one for visitors. And that ratio goes slightly down, just barely, for affordable units. But we are not discussing any changes to those at this point, as far as I can tell.
One other little thing, the other aspect of it that I think would be important as we go through in the actual reality of the process is that even staging during construction, especially of the big buildings, will affect, right? So it's not just the end. At the end, we have X number of units. When we're doing the 2 or 3, especially along George Mason, right? It looks to me like a lot of existing parking, when those buildings phase 2 and phase 3 start going, there's staging, there's loss of the construction area itself. And so there's a whole sequencing, and I know it's very complicated, and I get it, but it is more than just here we have 300 units and 400 spaces in the basement and la 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 la. There's a whole sequence over the course of the next 10 years that you're going to have to maintain a certain number throughout that process to at least.
Yeah, and we have requirements to, I think, manage that. I think, as was mentioned earlier in the meeting, one positive aspect of how we make some of that work, at least in the initial phases of construction, is the availability of the Penske site and some of the other portions of the property where some staging is already possible. And I think some additional creativity is going to be needed to continue that moving forward.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks. We'll go to Commissioner Slott, then Commissioner Weir.
Great, thanks. Just wanted to provide another perspective here and just say, the main advantage and an amazing thing that can happen here at Barcroft is retaining a massive amount of affordable housing and keeping a lot of our neighbors here on the Pike, where we can continue to be neighbors with them. And one of the most expensive things to build is parking. And so I really hope that we give the folks at Jar Lynch some real flexibility here, because I don't want to not house our neighbors because we're more concerned about housing their cars. So I think it's really important that we keep our eye on the prize, which is the housing affordability here, and recognize that a little flexibility on parking ratio might be what helps get us there. Thanks.
Thanks. Commissioner Weir.
Yeah, 2 things. I mean, just speaking for myself only as someone who lives on South 9th Street and frequently experiences spillover parking, I don't know if it's spillover parking or not, but as someone who lives very closely to an APA property and to another garden apartment property into Barcroft, I've never minded. I mean, the lack of on-street parking at night, and there is a lack of on-street parking at night, and I've never minded it because people need a place to park and the streets are public. That's speaking for myself only. But we do have programs in place, or at least nominally. We have, potentially we have programs in place to help manage some of the issues that Mr. Snyder and Mr. McCullough have brought up. One of them could be RPP. Do we have an answer as to whether or not Barcroft apartments and use permit people who live in use permit households are able to take advantage of RPP, or is that like site plan properties restricted?
Let's see if anybody from DES would like to take that one. My understanding was that new construction as approved through form-based code was not eligible for the RPP program. I'm not sure how far that boundary expanded beyond the site that was being developed.
So in theory, those parts of Douglas Park that are adjacent to and not necessarily across the street. Thank you, Mr. Cole. That does mean resident permit parking. My apologies. I should know better. In theory, people who live in Douglas Park, who are adjacent to, not necessarily across George Mason, but adjacent enough, could be eligible for RPP. People who live in parts of Barcroft, like where I live, could be eligible for RPP, and that could be a tool that could help minimize spillover from Barcroft into the neighborhoods. But then there's also a potential issue of reverse spillover sometimes, where we would want to be able to protect parking for Barcroft residents in and near Barcroft, which has come up indirectly as well in the call.
I'll just add that it's something staff can look into and see a little bit more of the details of where and what RPP is and isn't allowed vis-a-vis Barcroft and the surrounding neighborhoods, so that we have an answer to is it even a tool we have the opportunity to use if
Thank you.
the
Thank you,
board
Ms.
so
Collins.
elects.
Yep. And I guess if the neighborhoods are willing to look into it too, are willing to fight for it too, because you can't really. Well, I'm going to stop talking. Thank you.
I put myself in the list. I think to wrap up discussion. I think there's been a lot of really great comments. I really appreciate Commissioner Slatt just contextualizing the bottom line, which is the viability of this project, and suggesting that the proposal give Gyre Lynch sufficient flexibility with the parking requirements to make this all stick, and that certainly makes sense to me. But as a fellow resident of Douglas Park with Mr. Snyder, I also really appreciated his comment about the fact that we don't have the streetcar, that we don't have the transit network that frankly we were promised 10 years ago, and that's outside the scope of this conversation. But there's been some real failures by elected leadership to deliver on promises a decade plus. And I think we don't live in a vacuum, and Barcroft, the state that we're in from a transit and parking perspective, certainly, that's a very relevant conversation. And we're living with the consequences of those decisions and action or inaction. And so I think, frankly, a lot of folks at Barcroft are using street parking, and I really do like this idea of maybe there being permit parking for them. It certainly is a large neighborhood. I think it is a unique area as a project for the county, given the amount of financial and staff resources that we are dedicating to this neighborhood. It's really a neighborhood in and of itself in a lot of ways. And so I think that's something that we should really look at in lieu of maybe, concentrating, financial resources, maybe into parking garages that we don't necessarily need, for that additional parking. So that's my 2 cents. I do think that we sort of have to balance those things. Mr. McCullough, I don't know if your hand was up from earlier, but I think I'm going to have to transition to public comment at this point. You can certainly provide, additional feedback to staff offline. So we're at 8:50.
Sorry, I just
I
turned
do want.
it down.
Okay. So I do want to provide the opportunity for folks, if they are not on the group, if they're on the call, if they'd like to provide public comment, if you'd like to do so, go ahead and raise your hand, and then depending upon how many folks we have, I think we'll see how much time we can allocate. So if you have public comment, go ahead and raise your hand at this time.
Mr. Chair, we also have two phone participants who are off mute.
Thank you. Yeah, if there's any, thank you. If anybody by phone would like to make a comment at this point, and I have neglected to call upon you, please go ahead. Okay. Well, I'm not seeing any hands, and I'm not hearing anybody chime in. So I want to provide an opportunity for staff as well as the Giant Lunch folks, if you have any concluding remarks, and then we'll wrap things up and remind folks of our next meeting. So Matt, I'll throw it to you.
Not much. I mean, I really appreciate a lot of feedback and comments. This is really helpful, and I think you got both Giant Lunch and staff thinking about a few things. So hopefully we can synthesize that further and come back with more information.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? I see Lauren's turned her camera on.
Thanks. Matt stole my thunder a little bit. Just wanted to say thank you for the feedback that we've gotten tonight. And of course, we'll continue to work with staff on some of your recommendations and study those connections, their feasibility a little bit more, and be able to provide you all more information as we get through the second half of this process. Thanks.
Great, thank you. I'll take the, since we've got, it's 8:52, I'll just throw a shout out and say I really do appreciate all the work that's been done by the Giant Lunch team on this project. Really appreciate our county staff though, Matt Matusik, Alyssa, Alyssa's last name? But Melissa Danowski, Olivia Sontagiol are really doing a great job. We really appreciate all the hard work that you've put into the public engagement, the presentations, and trying to make a very granular process go smoothly and go swiftly, so that we can get some results out here and look at some concrete proposals this summer. Matt, what is on tap for the next meeting, subject-wise?
So before I get to that, I do see Mark Cole has his hand up. Just
sure, go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, you know, I'll be just really brief with this, and I hesitated to even bring it up, but just to comment on tonight's presentation, for mere mortals, people that don't do this stuff every day, that presentation was so dense with multiple planning districts, existing roads, existing paths, and even there were a couple of comments made about if we run out of colors. I personally found it overwhelming, and I really couldn't form any cogent thoughts really to contribute to it. So I guess I only raise it for potentially future meetings. Oh, and then another little nit too. As you're going through the slides, like the first half when during the applicant presentation, talking about all the different colors, and never once was a pointer used to help direct people to where we were talking about. And you have multiple diagrams on the screen and you're trying to figure out which diagram should I be looking at. So I guess I would just ask everybody to be aware, particularly if we're inviting representatives from all of the civic associations who, like I said, we're mere mortals and we don't live this stuff. Maybe just spoon feeding us a little bit more might help give us the ability to be a little more engaged. So I wasn't going to say anything, but since there was a little bit of time, I thought I would just, it's my 2 cents. Just take it for what it's worth and appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Mark. Definitely take some notes. I'm hoping we improve next time we discuss open space, which is a great segue to the next meeting on April 1. I think you're right on point. I mean, pointers I think will help. Maybe slowing down for some of the more dense topics is definitely, I think, a reasonable ask. And that is really, I think, one of the key points we're trying to achieve, is to make sure everybody is at least understanding of the topics and can feel comfortable to really weigh in and participate. So if that's something that has proven more challenging with transportation, we can certainly try to find some additional time to follow up. And I would imagine when we regroup in May, there'll be additional opportunities for that as well. So definitely helpful feedback.
Yeah, I similarly. If folks have questions, feel free to reach out to staff directly. If you want to talk to a fellow neighbor and get my perspective, if you're ever interested, feel free to give me an email. As the chair, it's our, Daniel Weir and I, as the co-chairs of this group, it's sort of our responsibility, as I see it, to help sort of bridge those gaps sometimes between, neighbors, residents, those folks, and then obviously what staff is trying to do. We're sort of helping to bridge that gap. So you can feel free to reach out to me at any point as well. So our next meeting is April 1st, same time, same place, virtual. You're going to get Commissioner Weir chairing that meeting. I have another commitment that night, but we're going to end 4 minutes early. So thanks everybody for your feedback tonight, and we will see you in a few weeks. Take care. Thank you.
Thanks everybody.